BRICS just launched a gold-backed currency. The dollar's endgame has begun. On October 31st, 2025, the world looked busy and loud. Markets blinked green and red like nothing mattered. We think empires fall from bullets and speeches. They don't. They fall when the ledger stops balancing, when the balance sheet cracks and bankruptcy becomes policy. That night, the story wasn't a summit stage or a flag on a podium. It was settlement rails. It was invoices. It was quiet math. A pilot currency slid into the plumbing, and it smelled like gold. If you want the truth, look at insolvency, not ideology. People say the dollar ends with a bang. A hyperinflation movie. A ticker tape apocalypse. But history rarely gives you theater. It gives you paperwork. The dollar doesn't die first. It bleeds, slowly, line by line, like an account draining in the dark. So let me take you to the crime scene. Not a battlefield. A spreadsheet, not a general. A creditor, not a revolution. A transfer request that never clears. Because the real weapon is not a missile. It's access. At the peak of American monetary power, the world looked gilded. Cargo ships moved like floating cities. Oil flowed like black blood through steel arteries. Every port, every contract, every commodity invoice spoke one language. Dollars. Crisp, clean, convenient dollars. There were parades, too, the modern kind. Not soldiers marching, but bonds being auctioned, demanded, celebrated. Investors treated U.S. treasuries like sacred relics. Safe, liquid, universal. The kind of paper that made everyone feel protected. It was majesty built from trust. Trust built from depth. Depth built from dominance. A network so wide it felt like gravity. If you wanted to trade, you orbited the dollar. If you wanted to borrow, you bowed to the dollar. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. Not in a dramatic way. In the boring way that kills nations. Interest costs creeping higher. Deficits turning permanent. Politics turning budgets into fantasies. The kind of rot you only notice when the floor collapses. The trap was addiction, cheap credit, endless demand. A global system that required dollars. So America printed dollars. Not always recklessly, not always wisely, but always with the confidence of a king who believes the throne is eternal. Debt is a monster that pretends to be your friend. It brings you comfort first, smooth roads, big budgets, quiet painkillers. Then it tightens the belt around your lungs. It suffocates you gently, then suddenly. That is how empires lose. And the antagonist isn't a man with a scar. It's the bond market. It's the treasury auction. It's the silent question every buyer asks. Will you pay me back? Because the moment that question becomes uncertain, your crown becomes paper. You can call it reserve currency status if you like, but strip the paint off. It's a privilege to borrow cheaply. It's a privilege to sanction enemies. It's a privilege to make the world store your debt like treasure. And it also creates enemies, not because the dollar is evil, because the dollar is leverage. The system is a lever, and America has been pulling it for decades. When you control the rails, you control the trade. When you control the trade, you control the oxygen. Then came the wake-up years, the kind history remembers as political, but the ledger remembers as mechanical. Accounts frozen, transfers blocked, assets seized with signatures. If money can be stopped, then money as a weapon. In 2022, the modern world watched sanctions bite like steel teeth, not just on banks, on reserves, on the very idea that a nation's savings were untouchable. Central bankers around the planet didn't just watch. They learned. They learned the dollar system is a club with bouncers, and the bouncers don't negotiate. They lock the door. They keep your coat. They hold your wallet. Then they tell you it's for security. So the question started circulating in boardrooms and ministries, a question you can't unask. What if we didn't need the dollar? What if we built a second hallway? What if we never had to ask permission again? That question is the seed of every monetary rebellion, not ideology, survival. Countries don't chase alternatives because it's trendy. They chase alternatives because they fear foreclosure, because they fear liquidation, because they fear waking up insolvent. BRICS had been a noisy acronym for years, a club with big countries and bigger disagreements. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. A lineup that looked impressive on paper and chaotic in practice. Analysts laughed. Investors shrugged. The jokes were easy. Borders disputed. Politics unstable. Economies uneven. Different languages, different priorities, different fears. A currency union. People treated it like a fantasy, like 5 rival families agreeing on one safe code. But the truth is, they didn't need unity to cause damage. They only needed a workaround. Not one common money for citizens. A settlement tool for trade. A way to settle large bills without walking through Washington's front door. And that's what the gold-backed whisper was really about. Not replacing your cash in your wallet. Replacing the pipe behind the wall, the plumbing. The part you never see until it bursts and floods the entire house. On October 31st, 2025, the pilot project hit the world like a silent file upload. A trade currency concept, framed as a unit, linked to gold and member currencies. A settlement layer meant to reduce dependence on the dollar rails. You can argue over the branding. You can laugh at the name. But don't laugh at the motive. Motive is everything in financial history, and the motive here is simple. Reduce vulnerability. Reduce exposure. Reduce the chance of being shut out. Gold is not chosen because it's modern. It's chosen because it's ancient. It's chosen because it doesn't require trust in a rival's promise. Gold doesn't vote. Gold doesn't sanction. Gold doesn't issue statements. Gold just sits there, heavy and final. When a system says 40% gold, it's performing a magic trick on the human brain. It's whispering stability. It's selling the feeling of restraint. It's saying, this is not vibes. This is weight. Think about the scale of that persuasion. But here's the darker layer. Gold is also a message. It says we don't trust your paper. It says we're building a yardstick you can't print. Because the dollar's power, at its core, is the power to issue claims that everyone accepts. Now step into the back room where the real deals happen. International trade is not romance. It's invoices, letters of credit, clearing, settlement, insurance, and time. Time is money, and settlement friction is a tax. The dollar system has been the fastest highway because everyone uses it. Banks are connected. Contracts are standardized. Liquidity is deep. If you are a company shipping steel, oil, wheat, chips, you want the smoothest route. BRICS wants to build another highway, not a scenic one, a functional one, A route where a trade between two countries doesn't need to touch New York or London to be blessed. A route where a sanction can't be flipped like a switch. This is why the story matters even if the pilot is small. Because systems don't replace overnight. They erode, they fragment. First you build an alternate route for sensitive trade. Then you use it for convenience. Then it becomes normal. And normal is fatal to dominance. Dominance survives by being the default. The moment an alternative becomes boring, the moment it becomes routine, the king starts to look optional. Optional is the beginning of the end. You want numbers because the ledger speaks in numbers. America's national debt crossing $38 trillion is not a political insult. It's a mechanical fact. Interest costs near $1 trillion a year is not a talking point. It is the monster feeding. Let that number sink in. $1 trillion in interest. Not paying principal, not building roads, not feeding kids. Just paying for the privilege of past spending. It is a leak the size of a river. It is a slow drowning. The debt-to-GDP ratio, hovering around 120%, is another smell in the room. Not because high debt always collapses a nation, but because it reduces options. It makes crises more expensive. It makes every policy choice a trade-off with a creditor. And creditors are not sentimental. Bondholders don't care about flags. They care about yield. They care about inflation. They care about confidence. If they smell fiscal dominance, they demand higher rates. Higher rates make deficits worse. The spiral begins. This is the addiction phase of an empire. More borrowing to cover the cost of old borrowing. More printing to soothe pain. More political theater to distract the crowd. Meanwhile, the ledger keeps its own calendar, cold and precise. So why would BRICS push now in this story world, in this dramatic framing? Because the system revealed its teeth. Because sanctioned power looked permanent. Because the cost of dependency became visible. And because resources are changing hands. Gold accumulation. Commodity trade shifts. Local currency settlements. New payment channels. Even if each move is small, the direction matters. In finance, direction becomes expectation. Expectation becomes behavior. Now we enter the descent, the chronological spiral that ruins every comfortable myth. First, a few bilateral trades settle without dollars. It's framed as efficiency. Then energy deals experiment with alternate invoicing. It's framed as flexibility. Then development banks issue more loans in local currencies. It's framed as sovereignty. Then digital systems connect payment networks. It's framed as modernization. But the ledger sees one thing: reduced dollar demand at the margin. And in reserve currency land, margins are everything. The dollar doesn't need to lose 50% overnight. It only needs to lose the next 5%, then the next 5%. Because U.S. borrowing costs are sensitive to confidence, and confidence is sensitive to flows. Here's the rule of three, because tragedy loves momentum. The trade routes shifted. The reserves diversified. The pipes multiplied. No single move killed the dollar. But together they made the dollar less unavoidable. The gold was hoarded. The credit was questioned. The allies hedged. That is how a system starts to fracture. It's not betrayal. It's risk management. Every central bank is an accountant with a nation strapped to their back. Now zoom in closer. Picture a meeting room where the air smells like coffee and metal. Screens glow with charts. Lawyers whisper in corners. A draft document sits on a table. The language is polite. The consequences are violent. This is the smoking gun moment, the paper cut that bleeds out an empire, a protocol, a memorandum, a settlement framework. It doesn't say we are ending the dollar. It says we are improving efficiency in trade settlement. That's how financial revolutions speak. They don't shout. They launder the intent in technical language. They describe a foreclosure as a restructuring. They describe a liquidation sale as asset optimization. In that room, someone says the quiet part in a clean sentence. We need a neutral settlement unit. Another voice answers, colder. We need something that cannot be frozen. Another voice adds, almost bored. Gold reduces trust requirements. And there it is, the brutal reality. They are not building a currency. They are building escape routes. They are treating the dollar system like a landlord who can raise rent at gunpoint. The new system is the backup key. Now the climax is not a Hollywood crash. It's the default moment in slow motion. The moment trust starts pricing in risk. The moment auctions clear at worse rates. The moment debt service becomes a political hostage. The moment temporary measures become permanent. Because the first default is not missing a payment. It's losing credibility. It's when lenders demand higher yield because they fear inflation eating their return. It's when a government's choices become narrowed to ugly options. Raise taxes, cut spending, print more, each one hurts. Each one engages someone powerful. So leaders choose the option that postpones pain. They borrow, they print, they distract. That's how insolvency becomes destiny. The social consequences arrive quietly at first. Prices creep. Rent bites harder. Groceries become arguments. People blame each other because they can't see the ledger. They can't see interest payments. They can't see settlement flows. And then the cold comes. Not literal winter, always, but a coldness of opportunity, a tightening, layoffs, delayed projects, municipal budgets slashed, the sensation of living in a richer country that feels poorer each year. Humiliation is part of the default, not because nations feel shame like humans, but because sovereignty shrinks when creditors set conditions. When foreign buyers decide your interest rate, you don't fully own your future. Sovereignty is solvency. Say it again. Sovereignty is solvency. If your books don't balance, your freedom becomes negotiable. It becomes a line item. It becomes collateral. Now step back into the global picture. If a gold-linked settlement unit gains traction, even partially, it signals something deeper. It signals that trust is being relocated, not fully, not instantly, but incrementally, like moving weight from one leg to another. The dollar's strength is not just America. It's the system around it. Deep markets, legal predictability, military reach. But the dollar's weakness is also America. Debt, growth, political dysfunction, the temptation to weaponize access. And every time access is weaponized, alternatives become more attractive. Even to countries that like the United States, even to neutral countries. Because risk managers don't marry. They hedge. So we arrive at the generational aftermath, the part history books rush past. This is where scars form. Because monetary shifts don't end in a single year. They stretch across decades like a long repayment schedule. If the dollar loses some reserve share over the next generation, The cost of borrowing rises. If borrowing costs rise, deficits get harder to finance. If deficits get harder to finance, domestic priorities become fights to the death. And the rest of the world adjusts too. Contracts diversify. Reserve baskets broaden. Gold holdings rise. Digital rails multiply. New institutions gain relevance. The old institutions lose monopoly power, even if they remain important. The worst part is this: none of it needs a villain. It can happen through rational choices. Each country simply tries to reduce vulnerability. Each central bank simply tries to protect purchasing power. Each exporter simply tries to get paid faster. That's what makes the story terrifying. No one has to win a war. The ledger just changes its preferences. The balance sheet just stops absorbing your deficits. And suddenly the empire feels gravity. You might be tempted to ask, so is this the dollar's death? That's the wrong question. Death is cinematic. The real question is this the dollar's dilution? Is this the moment the world starts treating the dollar like one option, not the only option? Because the end game of dominance is not collapse. It's competition. It's a multipolar system where dollars, euros, yuan, and commodities all share space. It's a world where settlement is fragmented and leverage is weaker. And if you want a war truth, here it is. The dollar's real enemy isn't BRICS. It's arithmetic. It's interest compounding like a quiet assassin. It's political incentives that reward spending now and paying later. BRICS doesn't have to be perfect. The alternative doesn't have to be cleaner. It only has to be usable. It only has to be good enough for certain trades. And once good enough exists, the monopoly loses its chokehold. Think about that. A system that ruled because it was universal now faces a world where universality is optional. That is the moment accountants start writing new rules. That is the moment the ledger starts deciding history again. The lesson is old, and it is brutal. Empires don't fall because they lose battles. They fall because their books stop making sense. They fall because the cost of maintaining power exceeds the cash they can raise without breaking the people. So if you're watching this like it's just another geopolitical drama, zoom out. Look at the invoices. Look at the reserves. Look at the gold. Look at the debt service. Look at the pipes behind the wall, because that's where the future is being negotiated, not in speeches, in settlement, in risk, in liquidity, in the quiet, merciless math that never cares who you voted for. If you want to stay ahead of the crowd, you don't watch the headlines. You watch the ledger. Subscribe to this channel, because the next crisis will look sudden. But the balance sheet will show you it was always coming.